morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Matt Friedman, reporter for Politico New Jersey and author of New Jersey Playbook. Thanks for tuning in to Politico's virtual coverage of the Democratic National Convention. I'm joined by the governor of New Jersey, Phil Murphy, who's a Democrat who's just a little over halfway through his first term and who's currently serving as chair of the Democratic Governors Association. Just a little context for those of you not from New Jersey. It's not a swing state. Got 14 electoral votes, and it's gone Democratic in every presidential election since 1992. But it's several battleground congressional districts, a lot of them in suburban areas that used to be solidly Republican, but have shifted towards Democrats during the Trump era. We also have a race between Trump's favorite former Democrat, aside from Jared Kushner, Jeff Van Drew, and Amy Kennedy, yes, of that Kennedy clan. We, of course, were hit especially hard by the pandemic. We've suffered nearly 16,000 deaths and almost 200,000 residents sickened that we know of. Before we get started, we want to hear from all of you watching online. If you have a question for the governor, tweet us at Politico using the hashtag DNC with Politico. That's at Politico, hashtag DNC with Politico. And in case you just tuned in to see what my eye looks like after my run-in with a bee, I urge you to stick around for Governor Murphy. It will be more interesting. Governor, thanks so much for joining us.
Good to be with you, Matt. Good to be with your colleagues.
Great. So since this is the convention, I want to start with a political question before we really delve into the pandemic and stuff like that. When asked previously whether you'd leave office to take a post in a Biden administration, should that come to be, you insisted it won't happen. Would you commit right now, unequivocally, to rejecting any potential offer to join a Biden administration if it's given to you? Even if you're offered Secretary of State, would you reject that?
Yeah, unequivocal, Matt. My job is New Jersey, and I can't imagine even in peacetime, I can't imagine another job, but certainly not given the circumstances in which we find ourselves. So I want to do everything I can, and we are, to get Joe Biden and Kamala Harris elected president and vice president. We'll be there for him and for her. But I'm staying right here, and we're going to stay together and try to get this awful crisis behind us as fast as we can.
So that's unequivocal, not going to happen, no way?
Unequivocal.
Okay, I'll hold you to that. So another big development just late last night, the Trump administration filed suit to stop your plans to hold this election primarily by mail-in ballot. And I want to get you on this one point that both the Trump campaign, I'm sorry, I said the Trump administration, I should have said campaign, has made, as well as Republicans in New Jersey, that if you can wait in line at the supermarket, at Home Depot, at the Motor Vehicle Commission, why is it inherently more dangerous to wait in line for voting? And I also want to get this, because if this lawsuit succeeds, do you think the state will have a challenge setting up for this election? Will it throw things out of whack? How will the state be equipped for in-person voting with such little notice?
So you'll forgive me, I'm not going to go near the lawsuit in terms of commenting on that, but let me comment on the waiting in line piece, but also more broadly, vote by mail. Listen, the implication is when you hear that you're either voting by mail or you're voting in person. And hey, gosh, instead of doing this all by mail, why can't you do it in person? In fact, we're doing both. We did it for the primary on July 7th. It worked quite well. We learned some lessons, particularly on the physical side. So we need more. We need more in-person capacity on election day, but also on the vote by mail side. I had a call with the U.S. Postal Service Chief Operating Officer this morning. Not the first time we've spoken with him, and we implored them to be as big and strong as they could be, but we're, for instance, going to put at least 10 secure drop boxes in every county. We're going to allow you to walk in on election day and hand your mail-in ballot in, or put it in the mail, or show up and vote. So the Motor Vehicles Commission, we do the same thing. Certain things require you to be there in person, but we also have been emphasizing that you can You can do your business online. A hybrid model, I think, is overwhelmingly an aspect of the new normal. One last thing, Matt. Vote by mail is not new in America. It's not new in New Jersey. We've had overwhelming success. People use the Patterson local election as, hey, what about that? To me, that's a positive data point. Some guys try to mess with the system. They got caught. They've been indicted, and if they're convicted, they'll pay a price for that. But this has overwhelmingly been a really important means by which folks vote, not just in New Jersey, around the country. And we're trying to balance public health with the sacred right to vote at the center of democracy. There's no reason why, in our opinion, you can't do both.
Right, and in Patterson, they did get caught. How are you so confident that this isn't happening elsewhere when it's not being caught?
Well, listen, I mean, that's probably a statement you could make for anyone in any crime in any part of our society. We have enough data from the primary election in July, which we have moved from June, to strongly suggest that the hybrid model works. As I said, if anything, the deficiencies were not all the counties. We're asking each county to have at least 50% capacity, and in each municipality, at least one location. That's probably where we had more deficiencies as opposed to the vote by mail side. But I'm highly confident we extended. The other thing is we extended the amount of days. As long as your ballot's postmarked on election day, we've now extended from 2 days up to 7 to make sure that your vote your ballot gets in, given the congestion in the postal service. We like what we have here. And turnout was high, which is a great validator.
Are you making contingency plans, though, in case this lawsuit just succeeds? Again, I'm not asking you to comment on the merits of the lawsuit, but in case this lawsuit does succeed, what's the contingency plan to go forward with this election?
We're good with what we got. We wouldn't have put the executive order out unless we had a high degree of confidence that it was a model that we could execute on.
Right, but I'm saying if you can't use that model.
I know exactly what you're saying, and my answer is still the same.
Okay. I guess we'll see if that comes to pass. Now, let's just move on to the pandemic. Since it hit New Jersey in March, you faced some criticism for unilateral decisions. You formed a lot of committees and commissions that you say have informed your decision-making. Could you point me to a specific example of how those committees and commissions have informed your decision-making? And on what specific date did you first, or you don't have to give me the exact day of the week, but could you give me an example of the first time you know of when you took a specific action really relating to the remediation of COVID-19 in the state of New Jersey?
Well, I could give you a couple of dates, Matt, on the last point. We started having meetings and conversations about this in January. We formed a cross-governmental task force on Super Bowl Sunday, which is February 2nd, which still exists, by the way. Judy Persicelli is its chair, our health commissioner, who's done a great job. Our first positive case was March 4th. I know that because I had surgery that day, and I learned that when I got out of surgery. And I believe our first fatality was March 10th. But we knew this was in our midst, but I have to say nobody understood, particularly in the greater metro New York reality, how much it was in our midst and how early it was. We got crushed like a lot of states and a lot of places in the world. For instance, in long-term care facilities, the spark that ignited that were either loved ones or more likely than not heroic staff members going in and out, unwittingly carrying the virus. And of course, it spread like wildfire. We've got a Restart and Recovery Commission, which has got about 15 to 17 members. That meets regularly in both subcommittees, and then it meets as a full commission every couple of weeks. It's chaired by Merck CEO Ken Frazier and President Emeritus of Princeton University, Shirley Tillman. I believe they're going to be with me. I'm looking at my friend Dan Bryant at one of our upcoming press conferences, actually, to update folks on the work of the commission. That's a real live. I know some states have been criticized. They put a lot of fancy names up, but the there hasn't been a there. That's not been the case here. So there's been intense amount of interest. Rich Trumka, who's the president of the AFL-CIO, has been very focused in working with us on workers' rights and protections. That's one example of many. We talk about our reopening strategies with them. We're now at the cusp of deciding whether or not there are more steps we can responsibly take. That's something we've talked to them about. And then we've got, in addition to that, I think we have 9 different closer to the ground tactical committees, which have, along the lines of tourism or faith-based institutions. And those have also been, again, much closer to the ground, much more tactical than strategic, but extremely helpful to us. Faith-based institutions, I mentioned that's one of the subcommittees. So as we were parsing through on how to get back to allow people to worship, that was an intense amount of interaction. So it will depend on the moment in time and what the decision is before us. But these have been extremely valuable bodies for us.
Yeah, I mean, some of the people, I know a lot of members of the business community are on the Restart Commission. And at the same time, you have the business advocacy groups really pushing you harder to allow certain things to open, gyms, things like that. Can you give me an example of something like specific that these committees have advised you on, that you've taken that advice and have really taken it to heart and acted on it?
Oh, I think a significant amount of things. I mentioned faith. How do we get back responsibly to worship? And so we relied heavily on members of those committees, and frankly, even more broadly, across all faiths, of exactly what that could look like, when we should do it, how we should do it. It was a topic of conversation with all levels of government, including me personally, with the president at one point on that. That's one example. Our team had a call on Friday with 300 plus gym owners. And again, the overwhelming amount of whom have been incredibly responsible, even in the face of enormous economic pain, about how do we get to yes in terms of getting gyms open. We talk to the restaurant folks all the time, not just the associations and the business groups. We talk to the members. We talk to the folks who actually own these establishments and are running them. So it'll depend. I mean, there's so many balls in the air, Matt. I mean, literally, and it looks a lot different when you're closing versus when you're reopening. But it's the range of topics and decisions. I could tell you tomorrow, I'm on with a big gym owner myself tomorrow. So that those conversations happen all the time.
Okay, thank you, Governor. You mentioned nursing homes and long-term care facilities in general. And of the roughly 16,000 dead in New Jersey, about 7,000 have been in those facilities. Last time I checked, New Jersey had the highest per capita rate of deaths in the country from nursing homes. Why do you think New Jersey's long-term care homes were so hard hit, particularly the state-run veterans homes? And what would you have done differently to prevent the outbreak of the virus in nursing homes across the state if you had the chance in hindsight?
Yeah, I mean, in hindsight, the obvious answer would have been, had we known this virus was among us. I actually don't know the per capita. I know our percentage of fatalities is, on both a national and a global basis, about in line. It doesn't make us feel any better about it, by the way. But I think overwhelmingly, had we known earlier that this virus was in our midst, any of us, not just New Jersey, and not just long-term care, but especially in long-term care, we would have shut down visitations, etc. You have, you know this, the big commuting counties in New Jersey to New York City, the big six, Bergen, Essex, Hudson, Union, Middlesex, Passaic, those were crushed. And the long-term care fatalities were not just in those 6 counties, but overwhelmingly, including, by the way, the 2 veterans homes that were crushed in both Menlo Park in Middlesex County and the Paramus Veterans Home in Bergen County. There's a myth that's been out there, a talking point, which is completely and utterly not the case. So the original moment, the spark of this, all data, all science, and by the way, we're going to do a complete soup to nuts postmortem on long-term care, on veterans' homes, on the way we've handled the entire pandemic. But the data overwhelmingly supports the following. It was unwitting, as I mentioned earlier, loved ones, or more likely staff, by the way, staff who don't get paid enough and have forced to have multiple jobs and therefore have more exposures, who are going into these homes unwittingly, in many cases asymptomatic, and passing the virus. And there was an extraordinary uneven performance by the long-term care operators. That's very different, I have to say, than our hospital systems. Our hospital systems punched at or above their weight almost entirely across the board. But the myth was that somehow we sent COVID positive patients back into the general population in certain long-term care facilities. That's a complete, that's a talking point somebody made up somewhere. Could that have happened somewhere? It may have. And if it did, that operator will pay a price. But we were unequivocal from Judy Persicelli, our health commissioner, on countless occasions. If you're going to have a positive person coming out of a hospital, going back into a population, it had to be cohorted or separated. Staffs had to be separated by floors or wings or even buildings if you had a campus. And by the way, if you, as an operator, if you could not do that, you had to raise your hand and tell the Department of Health, and the Department of Health would then re-pivot that resident or that patient.
Sure. Can I just follow up on that? Because one of the things about the long-term care centers that you've mentioned, their uneven performance and whether they did follow exactly your directive on readmitting COVID-19 positive patients. Do you regret signing the legislation that raised and pushing for it, that raised the threshold on civil liabilities for healthcare facilities, including nursing homes during the pandemic? And would you agree with efforts underway in the legislature, some proposed bills to roll that back?
I'm not sure I've got a comment on that, but that doesn't, this is life or death. So with all due respect to civil liabilities or pending legislation, we're talking about saving people's lives. And if an operator did the wrong thing, they should and they will, God willing, pay a price for that.
Okay, so you've been very clear that, in your view, quote, data determines dates. I've heard you say that at least 35 times. That your response is, driven by not politics, but by data. So could you give me an idea of what exact data you use to determine the state's opening decisions on schools in falls, and in schools in fall, and what specific data do you need to see to allow indoor dining, movie theaters, gyms to reopen?
Yeah, let me take the second one first. I hope we're closing in on those, but I do think it's going to be indoor activity where you are able to wear a mask at all times. So I was asked a question at our press conference today, could I see gyms and indoor dining happening on different dates? And the answer is I could. Similar to theaters. And theaters begs the question of whether or not you're eating or not in the theater, which I recognize. But I think we're getting close to that. Sustained improvement, which you can spot not just over a day or two or three, but over rolling periods of time. At the short end, 7-day averages, even better yet on 14-day averages, which is the incubation period folks broadly agree upon for the virus. And sustained numbers as it relates to spot positivities, the rate of transmission of the virus, new hospitalizations, the data that we talk about every day. There's no data that we're looking at that we're not talking about, and we know for sure this, when you look at other states, and even if you look at our own experience with house parties, the virus indoors is a lot more lethal than it is outdoors. One study concluded 19 times lethal. I'm not a medical expert, I can't opine on that, but the point is it's a lot more challenging inside than outside. So that's sort of gives you a sense of that. I think schools, as important as it is, I was asked if I thought eating out today was a luxury, and the answer is it's not a luxury. But it is not going to school. So going to school, particularly in-person instruction, where we know we must educate our kids, and we know that the data overwhelmingly suggests that in-person instruction is far and away richer than it is by remote. You start with an imperative, and then you chop through. Okay, what are your principles? Safety, number one. You don't want to put kids or educators or staff or families in harm's way. Quality of education. Equity. Not every family's the same. Not every family's got the extra room in the house or the extra device or the easily gotten hot meal, or one parent who could stay home and help out Johnny or Sally, or they can afford a tutor. So it's going to be in one of the, we put out a 105-page guidance, Matt, I think in June, so about 2 months ago. And we promised then that if we evolved in our opinions, if facts changed, we would listen and learn and adapt. So we found the money to close the digital divide. I'm actually speaking directly to one of the manufacturers of devices tomorrow to make sure they know that they've got to deliver the bacon here. We determined, it isn't enough to recommend kids wear face coverings. They got to wear them. We first said, parents can take the option, the flexibility to pull their child out of school. We have now gotten to the point, somewhat based on what I just said, where we're now giving districts the flexibility to say, we're not going to be ready on September 8th.
Okay, Governor, I've
put a plan in place. This is what we're going to do to remediate our challenges, which are more often than not safety, and this is a date by which we'll get there. We're okay with that. And so that's the process that we're in. I think the logic hangs together, and that's what we're doing.
Okay, Governor, I have so many more questions that I cannot ask because we've run out of time. I do have to wrap up now, but I'll ask this one with a yes, no, or maybe response. That's all I need from you. I know you can't profit by it by New Jersey law, but Governor Cuomo announced that he's writing a book on the pandemic and the state's response. Yes, no, or maybe. Any plans to write a book?
No plans to write a book.
Got it. Thank you so much, Governor. I appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me, Matt, and to your colleagues as well.
And see you soon. Take care. Thanks so much.